Hey, what's up, guys? This is quite spontaneous, but I'm here with one of my best friends in the whole wide world, Samuel.
Hey guys.
And obviously, everything that is going on with the George Floyd situation and the racial conversation, it's been on my heart over the last few days to actually sit down with Sam, because this is something that we actually speak about quite often. And honestly, out of all my Black friends and my white friends, I actually feel the most comfortable speaking to Sam about these topics, just because of his heart and just his authenticity when it comes to that subject matter. So I'm really excited that we get to, talk to each other on
Mm.
this platform and just really share our hearts. Yeah.
Yeah, at that point, I just also wanted to mention just how, Wole for me has been, or I speak to you directly, just like how you've been someone who I've like really been able to like process those kind of topics of like racial issues and stuff. For me, like, which is obviously like very sensitive and like many, pit holes and everything, but just how, it's just really cool how you're one of those people who you don't have to be worried about, being offended by stuff that you ask, whatever, and that you will, correct people in like just such a humble and gracious way, and just like how, you really give people that space to, just to learn.
Oh, thank you, bro. I appreciate that. Oh, bless you, bro. Yeah, so I guess to kind of like start off the conversation, you wrote a blog recently, sorry, apologies, I haven't read it, but I know you were telling me about it. Do you quickly want to say like what you were writing about?
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to mention just how like it was quite spontaneous today, just because in general, like over the last few days, like it's been quite emotional, and I've just been thinking about the whole situation a lot. But for some reason, I kind of felt that hesitation to like express my emotions and my thoughts and stuff. Just because, I know that like me talking about it is obviously different than for Black people talking about it, and just being aware of that sensitivity. But just as today's Blackout Tuesday, and just as I was posting that and just wanted to write a caption, I just realized, oh, there's so much more that I just need to get off my chest. And I decided, no, I need a blog post for this. So that's how I ended up writing that. And then also just how connected with that, like just how important it has been for me to just be aware of white privilege as well, just how that is very much a thing. Like, even though that has been something that Black people have felt like they had to like explain and justify or something, and I just wanted to just amplify that and be like, yes, like that is so true. Like, just like being more aware of like just people's experiences and everything. And then I think one last other point that was quite important to me to talk about is also just like how I felt like rather than pointing your finger at like blatantly racist people, like this police officer that knelt on George Floyd's neck, like I do feel like it is a heart issue that affects all of us, and that we all need to kind of really
Repent. Yeah.
and repent, and like just how, even though like I have a lot of Black friends like yourself, I have had thoughts that were racist. Like, I don't know where they come from, like just from like stuff I'd hear on the media or something, or just like my own insecurities or something. But in the past, that has been a reality that I've had to just like acknowledge and just like bring to God, and just like ask him to like work on my heart, and just bring his perspective into that, and like just help me see everyone like through his eyes, just like as his valuable creation, just like with any other issue of prejudice, and to not be driven by just defensiveness or like white guilt and all that, which we'll probably go into.
Yeah. And I like, even like a few days ago, so like when obviously the George Floyd incident went viral, you called me and you're just like, oh, Wole, like, how are you doing? And I'll articulate like how I felt later on. And what I just loved so much is that you checked up on me, and there wasn't like, in our conversation, I couldn't smell like any hint of like white guilt or any sense of, you didn't feel like you needed to defend yourself. And you heard how I felt, and you heard how I was processing some of the things that I went through and stuff like that racially. But what I loved is that you actively listened. And why do you feel like you took that posture?
Yeah, like I think it's just how, I guess, for me, like I had to also just get to the point where, you know, you have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of, just historically, like, you know, just a lot, there's been so much injustice and oppression, and, you know, like with slavery and colonialism and all that, you know, has been done like by white people to black people, and how that is still relevant today. Like you can just see that in so many ways, and just how you can't ignore that history, and therefore like it is quite easy to like just feel guilty about that. Like I think it's good to have a sense of responsibility for that, because like we do almost, like if we don't acknowledge that, like we can almost like continue those structures like in a way. But I think you know, that the answer isn't to feel guilty about that, and to almost like have the option of like, either you need to be defensive about it and say like, oh, that's not true, like, oh yeah, or the other one being that you have to almost like hate yourself and deny yourself for being white. Like that's that's just, like no, that's not what the whole Black Lives Matter movement is like asking you to do. Like you're white, like it's not going to change. Like and I'm black, so I want you to love yourself, like and not like try to be more black or whatever. Like just like be like race being like one aspect of that. But then at the same time, like I said, it's, yeah, I think it is important to just acknowledge difference, like and not to have that kind of oh, I see no color mindset, because there is a difference. The fact that you're white, like you do have a white privilege, and if you're not aware of that, then that does like often manifest in different forms of racism. So, yeah.
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 And like, when did you, I guess like in your own life, like when did you notice white privilege? When did you first notice it?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, I grew up in Germany, and like in a very white area. Like it was quite a small area, and like so I didn't really grow up even just thinking much about, you know, like, oh, I'm white. Like that was never a thought process for me. I think the first time, I don't know, like when I was traveling, for example, like that's one topic. I think like we were in India as a family, and like they were just, you know, thought we were so beautiful, like for our skin color and stuff, and like and that just showed me just how like those images and definitions of beauty like were like re-ingrained culture as well, which like also had to do with that history. And for me as a 13-year-old, like I was enjoying the attention, you know, but just how yeah, I think that was one of my first experiences. And yeah, just I don't know, that area of travel being one example. You know, we were saying how it really surprised me, like hearing like black friends of mine just having to think about the country that they were going to, like how accepted they would be there, like whether they'd have bananas being thrown at them or whatever. Like I was so shocked to hear people think, but it just kind of made me realize my white privilege, because where I just feel like I can travel wherever I want, and like
like I remember, I don't know if you remember, but obviously you being from Germany, like And I went to Germany, like it was such a great time. But I remember when you first asked me to come and visit you in Germany, I really hesitated because honestly, I grew up believing that Germany didn't like Black people. And this is like years later, like maybe like 15 years later that I've heard this. And it was still like a reality that I believed, that I can't go to this nation because they don't accept Black people.
Yeah, I feel like that is just one area. Like that, there were also other areas I think that you've mentioned, just like where you yourself like could. Do you have any others?
Yeah. Well, I feel like kind of like shifting. I guess kind of like shifting to like another example, like another topic. Like I've definitely like encountered like racial discrimination, and I think what I've seen the most is perhaps just like racial jokes and stuff. Like I remember not too long ago actually, when the whole Windrush situation was happening. In a professional environment, someone said to me, "Oh, let's pray that Theresa May doesn't deport you." And I remember just being like stunned, like, like what did you just say? And I said to him, like, you do realize I have a British passport? And he was like, yeah. And like he walked away and stuff. And there's definitely been like situations like that. And that obviously it's just not right to say. And I remember like when you called me and you asked me like how am I feeling, especially after like this whole George Floyd incident. I said to you that all of a sudden, like all the racial remarks have been said to me, and the different situations have been. I basically said to you that it's all coming back to memory, and it was just like overload. And I remember saying that I just feel like this is just going to be like our constant reality as Black people. Like we're just going to encounter these type of things and stuff. And I just thought that that's kind of a dangerous place to be, even as a Black person. I was realizing that even as a Black person, when it came to like racial injustice, because I was so used to it, that I would become passive towards it. And I kind of realized that especially as Black people, we do have a responsibility when it comes to this and stuff. And I guess something that we can also be talking about, we can talk about later as well. As a Christian, you know, a scripture that really resonates with me is when Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. And he goes on to say, teaching them to obey the commandments that I have given you. And I feel like even as Christians, we have the duty to disciple people, even when it comes to race. And maybe like you can talk about that, but I know that I've had conversations with some of my white friends, some of my friends who are from a different racial cultural background as me, and kind of like discipling them in this. Like something I love about you as well, Sam, is that you are someone who you're very socially aware and you've done your own research and stuff, but at the same time, you've kind of like allowed me into your space. You've had the humility for me to like correct you in some certain places. And like, can you just like talk about that?
Yeah, no, I'm very happy to hear that, obviously. But yeah, like I think, I was just really aware that, you know, this is kind of like a process that I need to go through. Like I was saying how, like also my blog, just about how I'd really picked up on that, just how that is something that, you know, Black people would naturally kind of develop like as a skill to, you know, like see themselves like through the eyes of like another racial perspective. And like, yeah, that was like a significant part for me. Like in my course, thankfully, like I had a lot of opportunity to kind of, so I studied human geography, and like every time there'd be like, a bit more leeway to kind of choose a topic. Like I'd often like try and just study more about the impact of colonialism or whatever, like, which is all like relevant in this discussion. But also, when it comes up, to just be able to listen to people. Like, I think that's something that I really learned as well, just how, just to have the listening role when it comes to that discussion around race.
Yeah, and I guess like what has it like being okay, not to focus on me, but what is it like in terms of having Black people that you can talk things through?
So I've just really realized just how I've needed that to I'm trying to think of some examples, but to just be able to ask someone, like, how do you feel about this and stuff, because like, obviously, like, we're close and everything, and like I'd just be able to ask you about those kind of things, and then that I would also know that you will correct me and have the humility to just really be direct and real with me, which is something that I needed, and like still need. I think like you were saying as well, just how important then for people like you it is also to just remember that there are also like lines that need to be drawn, because I think for you, like, you will have the tendency to just just brush off people's ignorance and like maybe like humbly correct them, but like sometimes people need to like know when there's a line and stuff. I think that's why there's been such a massive reaction to the whole George Floyd thing as well, because like people, like, stuff has been building up and like people haven't felt the freedom to like address stuff, and they've just
talk about it.
And have just got used to just accepting racial comments that might just be presented as like banter or whatever, but like
definitely,
like people. What do you think about that?
Definitely. And that's what I kind of felt like in terms of when I realized that even as a Black person that I was being passive to some extent, where, because I kind of feel like in some aspects, like I had like bulletproof skin. Obviously I'm not foolproof, but that I don't take offense easily. But I realized that because I wasn't correcting people, perhaps I was still doing damage. And I feel like, especially just as, for some of us who are Black millennials who work in the corporate industry, when we hear like a racial joke or racial comment and stuff, sometimes we feel like we shouldn't address it because, this person is my manager. I don't want to make it a scene and stuff like that. And we kind of just numb our experiences, or so we almost like suppress like how we truly feel and stuff. And I think in those moments, because we haven't addressed it, it means that we can sometimes in our silence, even as Black people, validate people's ignorance, or validate people's jokes and narratives about who Black people are, and about different ethnic groups and stuff like that. And I really feel like intentionality is from both places, me as a Black person and also as Samuel as a white person and stuff.
I was going to say as well, like, even you just bringing that up, it just made me realize like how I've also like maybe had the tendency where I'd be like in group situations or something, and like someone would let off a comment or something, and like where like I maybe should have like said something rather than just be like, I'm not going to be a part of that. So obviously like there's the right timing and everything, and like but it's something to take seriously, definitely.
And like, what would you say, perhaps, because there's also this thing that some white people have been saying, that I don't have influence, I don't have the power to change anything. Like, what would you say in response to that?
I feel like what a lot of people have been saying is just like the significance of like educating yourself as well, and to just really like hear other people's perspectives, like yeah, just like the stuff that you read and the people you follow like on social media. I think that's a big one for me as well, to just like you know, follow people who are talking about those issues like from another perspective, and like in that way, just like you checking your Instagram or whatever, like you will just pick up on, you know, other people's experiences in that way. And also, yeah, just when you have the opportunity to have those kind of conversations, or to be in situations where you might yeah, just hang out with people who look different from you, just have that kind of
and can I just touch on that? Yeah, like especially like besides from just having Black friends, like I know that you have like such a international friendship group. And yeah, so Sam and I, we both have Christian backgrounds. I lead a church, and Samuel's also on the leadership team of that church as well. Imprint Church, check us out. And when I look at the story of Jesus, when I look at so many examples of Jesus, especially if we look at the story of the Samaritan woman, there's so many times where Jesus actively jumped over a social barrier, a cultural barrier, and a racial barrier in order to connect with a person and to speak redemption over them. And I really feel like that's what it looks like, that we are meant as Christians to jump over those cultural barriers. And I remember even in church, I remember speaking about, I think the title of the sermon was Indifference and Discrimination, that for a lot of us, we only hang out with people who look like us, or perhaps understand where we come from and stuff. And I remember even someone saying that I just feel safe with my cultural group and stuff. And the reality is that as Christians, we are called to jump over those cultural and racial barriers. And literally, when the Bible says, go and make disciples of all nations, like that is our mandate. And we can't do that if we are, in a sense, just forming subgroups that we stick to. And I just love like what you said before, like how exposure, the idea that because you were interacting with different people and stuff, it was also a learning experience for you. Would you say that's correct?
Yeah, definitely. Like, especially because, yeah, I just didn't really grow up with that kind of, yeah, I just didn't grow up in like a very multicultural area, I guess. And like, I just needed, yeah, just, I guess, some level of education, or just being able to develop that kind of like sensitivity. And I think it's also just important to know that like it's completely okay as well to be in that place. Like I've needed to develop that skill, like almost. And yeah, because I think, you know, it is a difference, you know, for people who haven't grown up in the city or something, like but yeah, like just not shying away from those situations and just really seeing them as opportunities. And yeah, I think it's yeah, just been a real blessing, like in so many ways. Just yeah, just my own identity, but also just learning about people's different, you know, Nigerian ways of expression, or like the Caribbean or whatever. Like it's just been you know, so much more enriching in many ways, and just an easy way to kind of deconstruct all the generalizations that you had in your head from like wherever they came from.
Yeah, so good. And I think such a healthy way that you do that is that rather than making like a statement about like, you know, Nigerians, for example, or like Black people, you normally always like phrase it as a question. which I feel like is so, which I feel like is so humble. And like, because you phrase things as a question, it kind of like invites me into that space where I can comment on it. And I think like often in society, there is that kind of like generalization without actually getting those people who are being generalized about into the conversation. So I think that's just like a practical tip that perhaps when you're speaking to someone from a different racial group and there's a particular stereotype and stuff like that, rather than acting on it or referring to it as a statement, it's better to actually phrase it as a question. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So something that just with this whole situation that I've been thinking about a lot was just like I think I've already mentioned, just like my own journey almost of just being aware of like my own whiteness and how I've realized that is an important part of it, just to be able to just acknowledge difference, and that way to just be aware of that. And I just one situation that really highlighted that for me, just how that was like an area that I had to almost like grow in, was like I can remember when you took me to like another church like for the first time, and it was like I'm pretty sure I was like the only white guy in like the whole room, and like like 100 people, whatever, and that was like I guess like I just felt like I really stood out, and it was like just the most dominant thing on my mind like the whole time, and like I just felt like everyone was watching me, but like I don't think like it was actually the case, like for most people, like it wasn't really that deep, but it just kind of brought up like all this like just how I was like trying to make sense of like our differences and stuff. And like I can remember one person being like, oh yeah, just talking about how, oh yeah, no, it's an African thing or something. And like I can remember I was really surprised when he said that, because like I had so like ingrained in my mind like that oh no, like everyone's the same, like all British, and like almost like it surprised me that he was like identifying as African. And so that was like quite refreshing, and also it just made me realize just how much you pick up on just like the overall narratives that are going on, like just in like public discussion and stuff, like how that influences the way that you interact in situations like that. But yeah, it just kind of just made me aware that that is a situation that Black people are in like all the time, just being in context where everyone looks different from them, and like I didn't used to think that it made that much of a difference, but just that situation made me realize, oh yeah, like these guys actually have like a real just intercultural skill that I never learned to develop, and to be able to almost like navigate people's backgrounds that are or like English backgrounds or whatever, compared to like some of the Nigerian background and stuff like that. So I was just wondering, like, can you remember, were there like crucial moments like for you growing up where you kind of noticed like, oh yeah, I'm Black, like, or can you even remember like the very first moment?
Yeah, so I remember the first time that really stood out to me. So like, I remember my parents saying in year 6, like, I'm going to this school. And I was like, okay, cool. I've never heard of the school, and they named the area. And I never heard of the area. And I remember when I was in year 7, the first day, like everyone lined up in their classes. And all the different forms were there, and there was some form groups over there, and we're all like standing on the field. And I remember looking around, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm the only Black guy here. And yeah, like that was such like a dominant thing that was obviously going through my mind, because I grew up more in a context where at least there was like a lot more diversity, but not a context where I would be like the only Black boy and stuff. So in year 7, and perhaps all the way to like year 11, that was my constant reality. Like our school was only 5% Black at the time. And like even that, like I remember like that's where I really encountered like prejudice and like racism and stuff. And I remember I even had to go through a whole situation of like forgiveness, especially in my last 2 years, where like all the racial remarks were getting to me, and I really became like angry and really became like really rebellious in school. And I remember like my friends, my Black friends actually having like an intervention with me. They said to me that like, Wole, like I know you're hurt by all the racist remarks that you've been receiving. But they said to me like, we don't like the person you've become. Like you've allowed the fact that other people have hurt you to mold your character. Where you're constantly angry, where you're constantly rude, where you've basically become an unlikable person. And like that was kind of like a reality check for me, because I kind of saw like how my own personal pain affected my demeanor. And I honestly, for my sake, I had to go through a forgiveness journey where I actively, like I remember like actively reconciling with every single person that made like a racial remark, and just forgiving them and loving them. And I know this might sound a bit bizarre for some people, but obviously as a Christian, I believe that I'm called to forgive anyone that makes any wrongs towards me, and I take that really seriously. And it's actually a commandment, so it's something that by God's grace I will always yield to and stuff. So I guess, yeah, that was one of my first early experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one question that I feel like a lot of people have been asking, which is like, I guess a little bit simple, but what would you say to people who are literally like, as white people, like, oh, what can we do? What can we do to like make a change? Because yeah, like we did kind of touch on the whole thing of like white guilt and everything, and how that you know shouldn't be what drives you, you know, just like so you don't feel guilty, but like how can you actually structurally make a change so that like less people are experiencing like these painful incidences of racism?
Yeah, definitely. So I think I saw a quote where it said, I don't need you just to be my friend, but I need you to be my ally and stuff. In a sense, saying like, I just don't need you to be kind to me when you see me, but I need you to be the person that will fight me and who will fight for me and who will defend me, even when I'm not in the room. So I'll give a scenario. So I remember there was a time when I was in a gathering and it was only Black people who were present. And someone made like a racial remark towards white people. And I remember my sister saying, hey, like, you can't say that, that's racist, that's not acceptable. And what I loved is that my sister pulled that person up on it, even though white people weren't in the room. And I kind of feel like it's vice versa, that there'll be, you know, racial biasness, or there'll be racial remarks that will be said when Black people are not in the room, or even when they are in the room, and actively, you know, coming against it and speaking up and saying like, that's we don't do that, like that's not appropriate, and that's unacceptable and stuff. And you know, recently there's this narrative of where some white people are saying that obviously there's injustice, but I don't have a platform, I don't have influence, I can't change, you know, corporate companies and legislation and stuff like that.
Mm.
But I feel like every person, regardless of what race you are, has a circle of influence. Black people, we have a circle of influence. White people have a circle of influence. And there'll be some conversations that a Black person might never be present there, but you guys have an opportunity perhaps in your families, in your friendship groups to, you know, to share those narratives that are redemptive, to share those narratives that says, you know, I am for Black lives and stuff. So I think that's what it is, actively being an ally, where you speak up against injustice, even if it's internal or if it's external as well, if it's in the private sphere or if it's in the public sphere as well. Yeah, I feel like even in terms of just being Christian, then we have a responsibility to play as well. I love the scenario where in Exodus, God says, I've heard the cries of my people. And the verse actually says, and I'm concerned for them. Like, we have a God who's concerned for his people who are being oppressed in any sort of way. And if we're calling ourselves Christians, then it means that we need to have, regardless of what race we are, we need to have a concern for those who are being oppressed in any way. And I guess the thing that's really been highlighted right now is Black lives, how are Black people being oppressed? So I feel like we can't afford to turn a blind eye to it. And even though it might be awkward, even though it might be like sensitive and raw, we shouldn't retreat from it. We should actively engage in conversation. You know, actively engage, perhaps even in conversation with a Black person, you know, and listen, like you said, and say like, what has been your experiences, and ask questions and stuff like that. And I just feel like that's such a posture of humility. And I think that's what will bring great reconciliation as well. And like you've mentioned before, educate yourself. So educate yourself on colonialism and slavery, and what are the implications of it even till today, and what effects are we still seeing even to today. And reality is that even with me as a Black person, my heart's desire is not for white people to be condemned about themselves, or to feel like, you know, they are a horrible group of people. That's not my heart desire. But my heart desire is that white people will hopefully be some of the campaigns and be like, you know, I can actually be a part of the solution as well. And I feel like we're seeing more of that with just some of these conversations and some of the things that people are asking themselves. Yeah.
I think another question I have just about how would you say is the best way to engage in all of that, like in humility? Because I think it's quite easy to almost like be self-righteous about it, and like be like accusing about it, and that almost being like the undertone, like when you address these issues. And because that, I think, often creates that kind of tension and that kind of feeling of political correctness, like where people feel like, oh, that's like too much of a touchy subject for me to talk about or something, so then people will just leave it. Like how I think so when you're like confronting people on like you know, comments that they made or something, like how would you say is just the best way of like finding the right moments to do that and things like that, rather than creating more and more of a kind of tense atmosphere or something where things are basically like just getting worse.
So in the Christian narrative, we obviously use a word called discipleship, and to disciple people, which I guess was to kind of like paraphrase it, which is, I guess, doing life with people and actively processing and correcting and strengthening people on the journey. That's just a really broad definition. but it has like all of those like elements in it. And obviously we're trying to disciple people in the teachings of Jesus. But I think, yeah, especially we're called to disciple people, even in terms of like the racial conversation. So I believe that one way that that looks like is, I think for me personally, it's really easy for me to correct someone that I'm in relationship with already, who is a friend, who is a colleague and stuff like that. And I think, you know, as Black people, we can definitely correct people and stuff, but there's a way that we can do it where we correct a person and we still actively engage with them, and I feel like that's what it looks like. I feel correcting and engagement, it's just a beautiful thing. And definitely, like, we can just correct people, but I feel like when we're talking about like, let's really see this out and stuff like that, let's really see a whole shift in the narrative and a whole shift in what we're seeing in culture, it will be that correction and still engaging with that person as well. For example, when I was a kid, I was living in a Nigerian home, if I did something wrong, my parents will correct me and stuff, but it doesn't mean that they'll never speak to me again. And I feel like that's what it looks like. Like, I think if I looked back at my life, like when people hurt me, especially racially, I would disconnect myself. I'd be like, you're racist, you don't know what you're talking about, you're just here to downgrade my people and blah, 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 blah. And I would disconnect myself from that person. But I think the way of Jesus is to correct them and to still keep in relationship with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question I had, just in terms of the whole, I guess, like diversity thing. Like, I think obviously that is often like a manifestation of racism, like when you know, people feel like they can't you know, be with certain people because they've just experienced so much hurt and that and stuff. But like like, how do you think we're gonna see like the most change in that area? And like, I've often heard you talking about people coming up to you and like literally asking you like, oh, how do I get like, just more diversity like in this context or whatever. And and just like how to not fall into that kind of tokenism mindset.
Yeah, definitely.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. So like, I've had a lot of people that have asked me like, like, how do I get a more diverse church? Like, I've had church leaders ask me that, like, how do I get a more diverse church, or more, or how do I connect with more people like you and stuff like that? And how do I get more Black people coming to my church and stuff? And I heard someone else phrase this perfectly. And let's say if we're talking about the church context, he said that you get a diverse church by the people you have around your dining table. And I feel like if you lead a corporation, if you lead an organization, if you lead a church and stuff like that, diversity starts with yourself. Like, I feel like if you're not, you know, honestly connecting with other social groups, other cultures, other races, then it's going to be difficult for you to have a environment that reflects that. And I think going back to what the life of Jesus, and I think going back to Jesus would jump over cultural and social barriers in order to connect with people. And there's so many times, I think, even as a Black guy, I have jumped over even language barriers in terms of like connecting with people.
What language?
Like, for example, I went to China, for example, and even like that. But yeah, there's been so many times where I've had to like jump over cultural barriers. And some of my friends, some of my Black friends have been like, you know, Wole, you're just being too extra. Like, you know, just calm down and stuff like that. I'm like, no, like, you know, this is the heart of Jesus. Like, Jesus' heart is not for Black people only. Like, it's for all nations and stuff. So, regardless of if you're from Nigeria or not, or if you're from the Caribbean, and or regardless of whether you look or have a similar skin color to me, I have a responsibility. If you cross my path, I have a responsibility to at least treat you as worthy, and to, if I can, to connect with you. And I don't think in our faith, indifference is tolerated. It's not. There's nothing as a racial indifference that, yeah, that person's there and stuff like that. It's not that I hate them. I just won't connect with them. That's not biblical and that's not godly. So I think, you know, we have to be active in actually jumping over our indifferences when it comes to people and seeing them the way how God sees them. And I think lastly, I just want to end with this. When this George Floyd situation went viral, I posted on my Instagram, I remember saying that we have to repent for any preconceptions that we have of people, even in our hearts and behind closed doors. And you kind of said it before, but we actively have to bring that towards God. And this is a reality for all racial groups, where we have misconceptions about each other and stuff that does not partner or reflect how God sees that particular person, or how God sees that particular social group of people. And I feel like that's what we're meant to do. Well, we're meant to repent, and we're meant to seek the Lord for his perspective over those group of people. And I just pray that this thing will almost be a catalyst of that, where we honestly say, God, I hold my hands up. I'm not going to run away, and I'm not going to deny that I've had these misconceptions. I'm going to bring it to you, and in your own love and mercy and in your own grace, deal with me and do a restructuring of my heart. In Jesus' name.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. And I think also just to really be aware that it, like, especially all starts when things get back to normal again, and like when lockdown is over, when we're all back in our like normal day-to-day lives, and yeah, just get into that kind of like mundane everyday life, and to just really pray for situations where you can get out of your comfort zone and you can grow in that area, like whether that's conversations that you have with people, or just being intentional about the stuff that you watch or read or whatever on the subject, and to just really do those things that, you know, you've been posting behind doors as well, and to just really ask God to change your heart. Like, I think that's the only way, really. Yeah.
Man. Well, guys, thank you so much for listening, and feel free to message us or DM us if you have any questions. God bless.
Thank you, guys. Bye.